one case where we're undertaking a bit more further investigation from what we had today. With those numbers, that's given us the confidence to move. Over the next week, we expect further confidence again. And so I'm not expecting any surprises, particularly because of the proactive testing that's been underway. Dr. Bloomfield, though.
Yes, just one thing to add to that, Prime Minister, and one of the things about being in the lockdown sort of situation is even the cases that are coming through, and a number of the more recent ones in recent days have actually been people who were infected, it seems, and had symptoms before we even went into lockdown, and they have had residual symptoms, have now been tested and are positive, but actually they have been within a bubble, and so the risk of further transmission is very, very low, and we've seen that in reflected in the number of contacts for each case that is coming through, and our ability very quickly to identify for the vast majority of them what the source of their infection was.
Yeah.
So what's your plan to restart Parliament?
Hey, so it's something that the Business Committee has been discussing. My preference is, even though I know some of their draft plans, my preference is to still leave parliamentary business for the Business Committee to announce. What you will have already heard me say is that Cabinet will mirror what it is that Parliament and that committee determines. You saw some insights into how they may choose to organise themselves. So the Speaker has already worked through what social distancing in the debating chamber looks like, how Parliament could operate with reduced attendance, and we likewise have mirrored that in working through the way that Cabinet and Cabinet committees. My intention is that Cabinet committees will resume under Alert Level 3, but we will use a mixture of face-to-face and distance so that we can apply the same expectations we're putting across every workplace here in the Beehive.
The Finance Minister said last week that schools would have at least a week after the move down to Level 3 before they would have to reopen. You seem to be giving them only 2 days by your proposal.
No, so I think the intention has always been notice. We absolutely expect that there's a need for preparation and planning, and that's why you heard me speak today about giving access to schools, that schools being able to, for instance, do any cleaning, do any movement of equipment within school grounds, do any maintenance work, and also that teacher-only day we've been specific about for Tuesday of next week. For some schools, it may take some time thereafter. We're allowing, of course, the Ministry of Education to continue to work with the education sector, but we absolutely accept we do need to give notice, we do need to give time, and there does need to be preparation.
What's the time frame for
the
schools?
Early Childhood Council and a petition with 35,000 signatures from teachers both urge you to keep all ECEs in schools closed at Level 3 because they won't be safe. What's made you determine that they are safe?
I'll hand that to the Director General, who we're acting on his advice in the way we're operating within schools.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So this is one of the settings we looked very careful at the international evidence, and the experience both in New Zealand and overseas with COVID-19 over the last few months shows that it does not, that COVID-19 doesn't infect or affect children and teens in the same way as it does adults. So children and teens tend to have low infection rates, and they don't become as unwell if they do get infected, and they don't tend to pass the virus on to adults. So there are two key public health principles here. One is, first, minimising the risk that someone gets infected in the first place in Alert Level 3, hence the maintaining the physical distancing and the strict measures in a whole range of settings. And secondly, of course, limiting the number of people or possible contacts that people have if they do get infected to make it easier to prevent any further spread. So again, we had a look at Alert Level 3 approach in the ECE or school-based environment, and it's the advice and the approach is expressly designed to limit the potential contacts that children and staff members and therefore families might have to someone who may be infected. So we're very confident that it's possible in Alert Level 3 to open up ECE and primary schools, especially with that, primary and middle schools, especially with that notice so they can prepare ahead.
Keeping in mind, of course, our underlying principle at Alert Level 3 is still that people work from home if they can and learn from home if they can. We want as many children and as many adults, if they're able to be, still at home. This is in those scenarios where that's not possible. So we are not expecting large numbers to be in attendance. The second point to make is that overall at Alert Level 3, we're still expecting about an extra 400,000 New Zealanders to re-enter a workplace. We have a responsibility, be they people who are working in construction, be they people in manufacturing, or be they people in education, to do that as safely as possible. And that has been top of our mind when we've been designing the guidance and the decision around Alert Level 3.
When you say it's only 2 business days,
Yep.
what do you say to the hospitality sector who are losing another weekend, and that's already a sector that's
Do you
really
know what?
hard?
My message to hospitality is that actually the best thing that we can do for them is to get back to normal life as soon as possible. And what we've traded here is that by staying in that extra bit of time, that gives us greater certainty that we can keep moving in the right direction. That's what hospitality needs. And I can tell you, as the Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, that is at the fore of my mind as well.
With schools, Prime Minister, with
Yes,
schools,
Jacinda,
in terms
yeah.
of certainty for parents wanting a date, would you look at easing that message at all in Level 3 and saying you're welcome to come back to school now if you want to, or will parents have to wait till Level 2 to be able to properly send their children back to school?
Now, at this point, Alert Level 3 is Alert Level 3, and that guidance will remain the same throughout. Obviously, we've said that we will be revising it after 2 weeks. That's an acknowledgement that Alert Level 3 is still a very restricted place to be. And for many people, it won't feel a lot different to where we are now. It does open up, though, more parts of the economy, and that is a significant difference.
Dr. Bloomfield,
Sorry, I've really neglected the right side. I'll come to you after. Yeah.
will it be up to schools to vet and decide which kids need
No.
to be back at school, or are you leaving it to parents' good natures?
Yeah, that is not a burden we wish to put on schools. When we said voluntary, of course, that was an indication to parents. We are asking them if they can keep their children at home to do so. It would be too much of a burden to ask schools to vet and make decisions about the personal needs of the families and their parent community. So we are not asking them to do that, but we are asking parents to remember that the guidance is if you can keep your children at home, you should keep them at home.
So on this 2-week period, when will that decision be made on whether to move out of Level 3 or not? Because that's a Monday, that could be cabinet that
Yes.
day.
We're making it on the 11th.
Right, so there won't be any lead-in time. It could be that night.
We're making it on the 11th.
Prime Minister, did you consider dropping the alert level for some regions on the Wednesday immediately? For example, Te Tairāwhiti, who rely heavily on forestry and would benefit economically significantly with those extra days, but also have very few cases and are one of the safer regions. Did you consider dropping regions like that?
Yeah, one of the safer regions, but also one that I know is very much on board with our goal to eliminate COVID. Yes, we did consider a regional approach. And that is not something that we have ruled out in the future. But our view now was that on the data and the analysis and the modelling we had, we were best at this point to stick together as a nation. Now, one of the things that has also struck me, and perhaps Dr. Bloomfield might like to comment on this as well, is some of the cases we've had in their history prior to lockdown, there has been a lot of movement around the country. We are a people who move between our regions. And so that's been top of our mind when we've been thinking about the approach we take. A case might emerge in one part of the country, but it might have come from somewhere else. Is there anything you want to add on that?
Yes, just to pick up on that point, Prime Minister. So we were, both the Prime Minister and I were worried about one of the cases reported today, which is in Northland. And as it transpires, this is one of those cases where it was travel to Auckland, actually before the lockdown, that was where the likely source of infection was, which is reassuring. But this is, I think, one of the important features, again, of Level 3, is to stop that travel between regions, except where it's necessary to keep the flow of goods going.
I think important to also add on that Northland case, I think might have picked it up in March. So for anyone who has concerns about then the wider community, that's essentially less likely because of that transmission date. But it proves the point.
Prime Minister, was Cabinet unanimous in today's decision?
There was consensus. There were a range of views shared, but there was consensus around this decision.
What level will domestic flights and stuff start going back to normal?
So essentially, Alert Level 3 maintains the same expectations around domestic flights. And so it's only once you get further down the alert levels that you start seeing different provisions for domestic aviation.
Context do we have?
I'll come to you.
You go into
Okay,
To what extent did New Zealand's contact tracing capabilities factor into Cabinet's decision?
Our contact tracing abilities. As I've said yesterday, we had to factor in a whole range of issues around our systems and processes, and I outlined in the beginning our current take on how they're operating. You'll see from announcements we're making today, we continue to put additional resource into continuing to scale up our contact tracing, which has happened over the last 4 weeks. We've put in an additional $15 million already. We've scaled up the FTE capacity considerably. We're putting capacity to do that even further again with surge capacity up to 300 FTEs and an additional $55 million put aside for us to continue to build a gold standard contact tracing system, unlike likes of which New Zealand has never seen before.
How many, maybe for Dr. Bloomfield, how many contacts do we have the ability to trace per day right now?
Right now, with our National Contact Tracing Centre, we can trace up to 5,000
calls per day.
Yes, contacts per day.
You're confident that's enough if we did, heaven forbid, things got out of control down the line?
We're going to continue to build our capacity. What we want to be able to do is to be able to scale up rapidly, even more if we need to. Having that it all on a single electronic and linked platform across the country will enable that to happen. It means we can link in our public health units to our nationally based people, and we can also, like Healthline does, even use people doing those calls who are actually based at home and working off an electronic platform.
Just come. We'll let you finish, Toba.
Thank you, sorry. Did the doubling of the community transmission from 2% to 4%, was that a factor in your recommendation to Cabinet to stay in level 4?
Actually, the community, the cases ascribed to or concluded to be community transmission has continued to drop, especially over this last 3 weeks.
Yeah, so you'll hear every day we've been talking a little bit more detail around the cases that we're still trying to locate their connection. And at the moment, in the last 2 weeks, we've talked about the 1st of April, it's been a total of 9 cases. So incredibly low, and confidence around the way those cases have been dealt with.
Dr. Bloomfield, can you please give us a little bit more detail about Dr. Verrill's findings about contact tracing and where that, I suppose what confidence or not that gave you?
Look, I think in summary, and the report will be made available so you can read it for yourself, I think Dr. Verrill was complimentary about the work that was being done. She was confident that the direction of travel was good, that the model that was being implemented was good, and she gave some recommendations about how that could be further strengthened, including, and her very first recommendation was investment in the public health units, and this is what the Prime Minister's just alluded to as this further investment in public health units. And she also proposed a suite of indicators whereby we might measure performance as this evolves into a national service, so that we would know we were not just delivering contact tracing, but that we were delivering it in a way that was going to actually support our efforts to stamp out COVID-19.
Did she identify any weaknesses or gaps that would really be a cause for concern as we move into level 3 and then potentially level 2?
I would say that she identified that the need to move the system from a local, very manual process to a national and electronic one was what was needed to address, what you might call a range of small gaps and areas for improvement. So you will see that, I think, when you see the report.
And that'll be going out very shortly, I think, is my understanding.
Prime Minister, the government has had to nationalise PPE distribution. It's had to nationalise contact tracing. How much has this changed your mind around whether DHBs are too siloed, too localised?
Yeah. Look, I think it's fair to say that it has given me insights into the parts of the health system that otherwise, frankly, are underappreciated. And I have to say that there's a flip side. It's not just that we've seen actually where there may be greater benefit to a bit more coordination, but equally there would be greater benefit for us all recognising the parts of the health system that do an incredible job day in, day out, and that we may not always see. So it's had that dual effect for me. The Heather Simpson report obviously asks and answers some of those questions. We decided, of course, that we wanted to allow ourselves the time and the space to deal with the pandemic we have in front of us before considering some larger, wider scale health system reforms. I think that's the right decision. I don't think it would be right to plough into that when we're right in the middle of managing a global pandemic.
So just how much of a sway did your trust in New Zealanders not to leave a bubble so Anzac weekend play in making this decision?
I actually hope what you've heard me express is a high degree of trust and confidence in New Zealanders. And that's comparative to actually to other parts of the world where if you look at that Google tracking and some of the analysis out there and our results, they've all been achieved because of the actions of New Zealanders. So when I read out those results, yes, our frontline health workers, our public health workers, our testing has all played a role, but so have New Zealanders, and so that's why I have trust and confidence.
It did go up over the Easter long weekend, so you would have expected that there would have been a flare-up or perhaps additional spread over Anzac.
But additionally, what I think we also need to take into account is the length of time people have also been in lockdown, and I think that plays a role, not just what might otherwise be public holidays. So actually our thinking here, as I've said, was that for that small additional bit of time, we get huge gains from a health perspective and in the longer term an economic perspective if we don't have to go back to lockdown. I'll put it, Joe.
Just on the healthcare system, is it accurate to, I guess, frame it as sort of first world healthcare, but a third world system for delivering it? Is that an accurate reflection? Has it taken an epidemic to actually acknowledge how bad the system is?
I think that's crude, and I think that does a disservice to our workforce as well, who's not just working within the system, but have helped build responses quickly and effectively. So look, yes, you've asked some questions about centralisation and decentralisation, but keep in mind, even for our contact tracing, we need people on the ground with local knowledge who know their local community, and that is particularly important for public health. So yes, we want greater national support of that, but we must always keep that local knowledge and expertise as well. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. There's more work to be done, and we've always said our health system need to be rebuilt, but I'm not going to rebuild it in the middle of a pandemic.
Are we behind countries like Australia when it comes to that nationalised approach? I mean, are we basically having to speed up?
Again, let Dr. Bloomfield's facial expressions answer that question.
Look, I think we just have a different system from Australia, recalling that they have a Commonwealth and the state system. So in my discussions with counterparts in Australia, they often look with envy to New Zealand, in particular the fact that our primary care is much more integrated at a local level, so we have much better integration between primary and secondary care, and the opportunities afforded by our local alliances and similar arrangements. I think that Australia looks to us with envy. What we, I think, both do, and we also look further afield, is to learn from each other's systems and try and take the best of each other's.
Up on that, in terms of what you've said though previously, we've had to create a national system, haven't we? So we haven't had one, have we?
This is very specific to our public health services. So we have our 12 public health units around the country. Some look after the public health function for more than one district health board. And whilst there is a national component to that, for example, we contract directly from the ministry with those public health units, and the medical officers of health are delegated or designated by myself. There is still, a bit like our district health boards, they do tend to be contained within their region and deliver services for their region. What this has shown is that there is both a need and value in having that local and regional capability and capacity linked much more and integrated much more strongly at a national level.
I do think it's important to recognise that until really the beginning of the year, these services were used for TB, measles, on a relatively infrequent basis, to then suddenly have to scale up for a service that could operate nationally in a global pandemic. So yes, there has been areas where we've needed to boost resource capability, build a national system of collating information across regions, and we've had to do that very, very quickly, and that has meant there's been more work to do. But when you think about what we usually have to do with these services and the additional layer that we've asked them to contend with, their response has been incredible. There is more to do though, and we're all very, very open about that.
Just on the elimination target, you say that this doesn't mean 0 cases.
Yeah.
Does this mean you're prepared, or at least
expecting to have the virus in the country until there's a vaccine?
Look, I do again think there's a big difference between the notion of just suppression, where you accept almost the existence of COVID-19 in New Zealand's strategy, which has been this ongoing campaign of elimination. But of course, the reason I wanted to give that explanation is when you hear the word elimination, you think gone forever. And I don't want New Zealanders to think that when they see a case, that means we've failed. It doesn't. It means zero tolerance. So every time we see a case, we basically pounce on it. We do everything we can then to shut it down and to eliminate it when it arises. And we will have to keep doing that on an ongoing basis, and yes, until a vaccine arises.
I'll return to the question of the regions, because I think there's so few cases now. I think 40, less than 40 in the last 4 days. There are going to be regions in New Zealand that haven't had a case in a week or so. So, and you're going to have cries from those regions to reopen or go to level 2. Are you open to doing that, or is that just a closed shop until 11 March?
No, the decision we've made today is for all of New Zealand. We haven't ruled out in the future circumstances where we may take on regional variation, but we haven't adopted it in this instance.
A couple for other newsrooms, if that's all right. Firstly, our sports department, at what alert level are contact sports likely to be able to resume training again?
Yeah, we're doing further work at the moment that is primarily applicable to alert level 2.
Australia's forcing tech giants like Google and Facebook to pay local media companies for their content. Will you follow suit?
To pay local media companies for their content. I haven't seen that announcement. I'll look in a little more detail. I would again remind, just give the example though, in recent times our COVID-19 advertising campaign has predominantly gone through and had the biggest proportion of spend with our mainstream media rather than alternates like Facebook and online services.
Facebook is sharing local media content though, and it's picking up a big share of advertising revenue. Should those tech giants be paying a kind of dividend of that?
Of course, we've had the debate about digital services taxation. That's something we consulted on. It's not something we've made any decisions on, but you will remember that as a government, this is a question that we have asked the public and sought their feedback.
Prime Minister, in a week's time we go to level 3. What will you be looking for in that 2 weeks at level 3? What sort of indicators will you be looking for maybe to go to level 2?
Again, same New Zealanders will be looking at the same things we will be. Again, what's happening with our case numbers, what those case numbers tell us, the story that they tell us about transmission and where they're happening. So again, we'll be sharing that data in real time. And also, we'll continually be looking at keeping our testing up, keeping that positivity rate low, so for a big number of tests, just a small number of positives, and making sure we get that good geographic spread. Dr. Bloomfield, would you like to share yours as well? I'll just let Dr. Bloomfield just add as well.
So I think those are the main features. We'll be wanting on a daily basis, as we have been doing, to really understand if we're getting cases, where they are and how we got them. And then, as the Prime Minister said, that really strong stamp it out posture. So that will be really critical to giving us confidence that the level 3 measures are working. And I think also, and the Prime Minister's alluded to this, we need to be even more vigilant in level 3 than in level 4 because we don't have the protection of the full lockdown scenario. And so we'll be wanting to see that New Zealanders are maintaining those really critical behaviours that will help protect us and help keep those chains of transmission broken, really, and that is in particular around physical distancing. So that will, I think, be critical also to our advice about whether or not to move further beyond
I'm aware
level 3.
that many of you have deadlines for filing, so I'll just take 2 more questions, if I may.
The NHI, what proportion of New Zealanders does it have up-to-date contact details for, and is it enough?
Very high now. I won't guess other than to say it's well over 95%, and the reason for that is we now have a national electronic enrolment service through our primary care, and one of our best ways to get up-to-date contact details for people is when they enrol through their general practitioner with the PHO, and that is updated. That is a file is sent every month into the Ministry of Health, and the information, any updates on address information, goes into the NHI at that time. So it's very contemporary.
Yeah.
Can I do exactly what you asked them to do today? Did Canada do exactly what you recommended, or was it not? Was it right?
Well, I'll have to defer to the Prime Minister on that.
Dr. Bloomfield wasn't part of the Cabinet decision, but I can tell you in writing he gave us the advice that we do exactly what we have announced today.
So there are some concerns from principals and teachers that at level 3 work from home if you can means that those who can't are more likely blue collar workers. They'll then have to send their children to ECE to schools. What is your message to those principals, teachers?
Sorry, you'll have to explain to me what the issue, the difference is therefore.
That they will have to send their kids to
Yes,
school.
I mean, ultimately we are asking parents who can work from home to work from home, and yes, there will be certain types then of workforces that are more able to work from home that can't. But I think we also need to keep in mind that there have been hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who are in our essential workforces, including people who are delivering our goods and services and people who are sitting on the checkouts at supermarkets, who have continued to work for us, and now they will be joined by others. I consider, therefore, our teachers part of that critical workforce. And I do believe that we can, of course, focus on their health and safety as well as the children, which should be a small number than what they are used to be able to create bubbles of safety within a schooling environment to the best of our ability. Okay, just the last two, Gina and then Jo.
Because you've extended the lockdown and therefore the amount of time that some businesses will have no cash flow,
Yes.
will you extend the wage subsidy scheme?
No, keeping in mind the wage subsidy scheme was for a 12-week period, which of course is well beyond what our Alert Level 4 and even, no. So Alert Level 4 obviously has gone for 4 weeks and then we'll be going through to those additional few days. And then even with the extra 2 of Level 3, that's still well below the 12 weeks worth, which the wage subsidy was the value of.
Just in terms of your remarks yesterday about public attitudes being part of the consideration, what actually got brought to the cabinet table around that? I mean, have you effectively been doing sort of Zoom focus groups and polling around this? How do you weigh that?
Oh, and that's a very good question. It's very difficult, but one of the things that you look for, of course, is the level of compliance. That obviously if people are feeling like they're being asked to do something that is in keeping with what's required to protect New Zealand, then you're more likely to see that compliance. And I think what you can see from the data we do have from things like Google tracking, for instance, that they've made publicly available, is that New Zealanders' compliance has been really high, and I take that as a sign that they can see the value of what we're doing. You only have to look overseas to see why this is so important. Okay, thank you everyone.